it's not selfish to put yourself first. It's not selfish. You should not feel guilty. And that's one of the biggest challenges parents face, is feeling guilty for doing things for themselves. It's not. When I am not dealing with my kids appropriately in a way, for example, if I raise my voice or yell, it's because I'm not in the right state. It's because I haven't brought myself to the point where have to resolve whatever's inside of me. So I haven't put myself priority, because when I'm aligned with who I am, when I'm able to react, I'm able to engage differently with my children.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. I am your host, Khanani Abraham, and I have a really awesome recording for you today. My interview was with Purdeep Sangha, who is a business coach, an international business coach, as well as an author of the award-winning book, The Complete Man, and is also the host of the TV show for entrepreneurs, Mind Your Own Business. What I really enjoyed is so many different aspects of my talk today with Purdeep, and specifically on this topic that we haven't discussed before when it comes to the father's role, but talking about adapting activities for different ages, which I think is important, as sometimes we can have different ages within the home, talking about navigating the changes within our children and how we're supposed to go about that as parents. I think setting goals for fatherhood, both for the child and also for the parent, I think is very important. But I think the most important thing that I really enjoyed talking about was defining a healthy balance and harmony within who we are as a parent and all the other aspects that we are, whether it's being a child ourselves, being a spouse, being a husband, being a business partner, being an entrepreneur, being a doctor, a lawyer. We have so many different hats that we wear. And I think Purdeep does such a wise and healthy and fresh outlook when it comes to the concepts of creating a healthy balance. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Thank you again for listening to this awesome episode. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on your favorite social media page, or you could email us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. So Purdeep, based on, your experience specifically, when it comes to coaching aspect of things, and our topic today is talking about fathers. I'm curious if there's one or two points that just, come to you off the top of your head just regarding father's role when it comes to the balance in parenting and, trying to provide for the family, but at the same time, maybe being an entrepreneur, having your own business and creating a balance. What would be like one of the, first things that you would say is the utmost importance when it comes to making sure that a father has the proper balance in their parenting?
Yeah, a great question. I think one of the most important things is this concept of balance needs to be defined. Because I used to use the word balance too, and when I was working with men, they would see this as a concept of time. But it's not just time. It's actually time, energy, and other resources. That's really what it is. Because a man could be, like, I could spend an hour with my son and not be fully present and not be fully engaged and not put all my energy into that hour, or be, you can say, distracted by all the work that I have to do. So this concept of balance needs to be understood. It's not necessarily balance. It's what I could refer to as harmony, which is the time that you are actually spending. Is it harmonious with everything else in your life? So the time, energy, resources that you're spending in your business, does it bring harmony to the rest of the areas of your life, and vice versa? So if spending an hour engaged, your son or daughter is appreciating the time with you, if that is creating harmony in other areas of your life, like your child is actually walking away and saying, thank you, I appreciated that time, or they just felt good about it, great. Or even if it's 10 minutes compared to that hour. So it's not necessarily balanced from a time perspective, it's more harmony. So we as men need to be better in terms of engaging and being more present and putting more energy into that time and effort when we do have it. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is setting goals, because we typically have goals for our business or professions and finances, but we don't have very many goals, if any at all, when it comes to being a father. So what is that goal? And the reason why I say goals is because our brain is a goal-driven organ, and our brain directs resources according to the goals that we have. So our brain will actually do two things if we think about it. It will put resources towards our goal, or it will be put resources towards what distracts us from our goals. So we need to understand that goals are the best thing that we can do to keep our resources aligned. And part of that means that we have to have goals for our family and particularly our children, or how we are as fathers with our children. So those are the top two things I would suggest.
So I think those two points are really on par with things that we know that I know I talk about in my office as a psychotherapist, dealing with young dads, and I think in general we talk about here on the podcast. I want to unravel those things just like a little bit more over here, just because I feel like there's so much more to talk about over here. Obviously, I think the concept of quality over quantity when it comes to the time that you're going to be spending together with your children is of utmost importance, because we can be present because, okay, it's 6 o'clock and I'm going to be home for dinner and for homework. And if our minds are balancing our checkbooks, or making sure that we have everything set up for tomorrow, that we're not present. So, you could just talk a little bit more about the concept of that harmonious part of being there, that harmony of how to do that when it comes home, whether it's taking off certain loads of the entrepreneurship and sort of leaving that outside as we come in, or if we're upstairs in our home office nowadays, making sure we leave
Sure.
things in that room there and bringing it down. How can we better make sure that we're preparing ourselves or prepping ourselves for the other job? We might even say the more important job of being the parent. How can we prepare ourselves more for that role in a way where we're present and we're there together with our kids?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because there's a number of moving parts there. It's not just one thing. And our life and us as human beings, as you know, is we are an ecosystem. We are an ecosystem of many different things, of things around us, the people around us, our environment, our mind, our emotions, our body. One of the most important things to identify is, so where we start is we typically see how productive a man is in their profession or career. So if we can determine how productive they are and how to improve their productivity, and here's an example. If they're working 12 hours a day, is there an opportunity for them to condense the amount of work that they're doing, still get the same results, but do it in 8 hours? And for the vast majority of men, I can tell you, because our area of focus is on performance and productivity, that can happen. So let's just say for a man who's working 12 hours and just like, I just don't have time for my kids, you can say, well, is that time productive? And 95% of men that we work with, we can improve the productivity by at least double or triple. So there is significant improvement in terms of productivity. So now instead of working 12 hours, you're working 8 hours, you have another 4 hours to actually put towards things that you want. It's not just your kids, it's also you as a man, as a human being. What are your hobbies? What are the things that energize you? Because spending time with kids doesn't always energize a father, right? Because it can be time consuming. It could be time spent disciplining, right? Or negotiating.
Energy depleting.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes to the concept of energy. Ultimately, at the end of the day, and it depends on what stage the children are at, your children can be consuming your energy or they can be giving you energy. And that is something that we have to identify as well. When they're toddlers, I'll give another example. My brother had two sons under the age of 3 during COVID. They were major energy drainers, and not because, they're not bad kids. It's just COVID. So they had little support. Their daycare was put behind in terms of construction because of COVID. They were challenged, obviously, with two boys. Within that short of period, they require a lot of time, energy, and attention. My brother was just wiped out. Like, he had no capacity to do other things. So the amount of energy that we put into our families, we have to be cognizant of that. And whether that's energy we have to put out or energy we get in. So when I say productivity, that typically allows men to have more time and more energy to spend. And then they have to allocate that time accordingly and have the discipline to do so. So it's not just productivity, it's also discipline. The good old word discipline. And I'm a firm believer. And because, my background, just in terms of what I've learned and my mentors, if we take a look at philosophy, discipline is a core aspect of almost every single philosophy. And discipline, there's a reason why discipline, a lot of people say it leads to freedom. And so for men, we have to be disciplined in our approach. If we have 2 hours that we have allocated for our families, we need to be disciplined in spending that 2 hours with undivided attention towards that. I'll give a simple example of what we train men to do because a lot of men say, hey, look, I have that time, but I still can't focus. I still can't be fully engaged because I'm still thinking about these other things. So one of the core concepts, obviously, you understand is our core identity, or our ego, or however we want to present ourselves. But let's just say we all have this identity as a man, our construct of who we believe we are. Well, our identity at work, we have to not necessarily leave at work, but core components of that we have to leave at work. So one of the things I get men to do is say, what is your identity at work? We construct that. And then we construct what their identity is at home. And then what we do is we have what we call a ritual to enable them to transition from the person at work to the person at home, because that ritual will help them psychologically and emotionally, and even their body transition into that new identity with, guess what? A new goal. So if you are now, you've told your mind, your body, and your spirit that you're transitioning, and you have this ritual, and you are now into this transitioned identity. For example, when I play with my kids, I'm Disney dad, right? So that's kind of where the identity that I have, and then I have a goal that's attached to it. Whatever that goal is, could be as simple as, or an objective, or an end result, or an outcome. They're the same things, right? I say, I want to just have fun with my kids for the next 15 minutes and make them laugh, whether that's playing a video game, whether that's rough and tumble, whatever that is. But now my mind has attached onto this identity and this goal, and it's easier for me to spend time and energy in that period of time because I've structured it that way. So that's just one technique that we use.
I love it. The thing that's really stuck out to me, besides for obviously the identity, and I think discipline is something that really comes to mind and really resonated to me. But just hearing the words Disney Dad, it really, was so personable. And I think anyone that's listening to this, and myself included, I think it's really about finding that type of Disney Dad that's right for you. And when we all think the word Disney, we all think of different characters. For me, it might be Goofy. For you, it might be Mickey Mouse. And it's about creating that specific persona within that Disney dad, I think, is really important. The way I like talking about it is, we wear different hats throughout the day. Sometimes we're wearing a sheriff hat, sometimes we're wearing a chef hat, and sometimes we have to wear a policeman hat because your kids can't run in the street, and we have to be a little stricter with them. And even in dad mode, we have to wear different hats at different times. And I think it's about knowing what to do when, which I think that, to your word, discipline, I think is so important and so vital. And when, as I'm taking my own notes here, that's something that I'm not just writing down, but I'm also circling and highlighting as well, because I think it's so important that you talk about the word, we mentioned before, of resources. Can you talk a little bit more about resources regarding making sure that we're doing right within the discipline, within having that Disney dad, but regarding resources, where and what can we do to make sure that we're being dad properly within the dad mode? Obviously, there's so many things when it comes to the working dad that we can talk about, but I want to focus in on the dad part of the discipline, and what are the resources that we can do, or we can find, or we can make within what we have available to us that can be making us better dads.
Yeah, so there's a practical element, and so if we take a look at resources, what are resources? There's things that you have to either consume or you get to achieve something. And so for a person, the resources could be time, they could be energy. So for me, there's three particular things that we focus on. So we don't necessarily focus on time as much. That's kind of a fourth, but there's time, there's focus, right? Or it could be an analogy. They're not the exact same thing, but attention, energy, and then mindset. So focus, energy, and mindset are the three most important resources that we work with men on. So at any given time, where's your focus, right? So we have to bring them back into that moment. What are they focusing on? Where is their energy? And we can have different levels of energy. So if we are physically drained of energy, it's more difficult for us to achieve that task. So does that mean that before, if I'm going to play with my kids, do I have to make sure that I have enough energy? Am I hydrated, for example? Have I eaten something, or am I just going off of a coffee that I had earlier this morning and I'm drained physically? Like, do I have the proper energy? And that's not just physical energy, it's cognitive energy. As we know, cognitive energy consumes a lot of our calories, like literally consumes our calories in our body up to 25 to 30%. So if we have spend an entire day making decisions and putting out fires and everything, our cognitive energy is going to be reduced. So we have to be aware of that and put it. I'm going to say measure it. And so there are times where I say, "Holy crow! Like my cognitive energy is just low." Now, what is the activity that I can do with my kids that doesn't require a high level of cognitive load? So simple one is rough and tumble. I don't have to think. I'm just throwing my kids around and they're throwing me around, and that's what we do. So I use or I measure where my resources are in terms of the energy and say, what can I do at this point to adapt to what I have at this point? The other
I
one is
love that.
mindset.
I think that's
Yeah,
a
sorry,
very,
go ahead.
very good point. And I just want to throw an over here. A lot changes though when you have a teenager, and the rough and tumble doesn't work as well. When it comes to how we would deal with them. And I honestly, be honest, right now, I'm speaking more as a dad than I am as giving an interview or having a talk with you, Pradeep. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. When we talk about this specific point, which is a great point, and I agree with it. But when it comes to different ages, our role as
Yes.
parents and the hat that we wear is different. So how does that change when we're dealing with a teenager?
Well, it really comes down to identifying what your teenager enjoys doing and wants to spend time with you doing. And I think that's something that we kind of lose sight of as well. So again, there are different stages. And when we work with men who are older and they have children that are older and they get to see their children less, but yet they want to, you have to find something that actually works for both of you. Because you can't force your kids, like you said. My kids, I can still force them a little bit into certain activities. With teenagers, you can't. But that also requires you knowing your teenager a little bit better, right? Getting to know. And I think this is something that's very common for many men is that we are fathers, but we don't necessarily know our children as well as we should. And that requires deeper conversations. Also requires observation as well, which is just a lot of times I find myself, and I do it consciously, is just observing my children and not saying anything to see what is it that they're doing, what is it that they like, and what puts a smile on their face. And so if we can't have those conversations, because a lot of teenagers they will say, "Yeah, dad, whatever." Yeah, like you get that typical response or whatever that response is. Observation is very important. And so here's just it's some men, one of the things that I find that men are challenged with is that they don't have the time or they don't I shouldn't say that. Not they don't have the time. They haven't structured the time to take a particular block of period and just say, I'm not going to focus on anything else. Maybe it's just an entire day. Maybe it's an entire week to say, I really want to just observe my family. Like, I really just want to observe what's happening because we are so busy going on all autopilot. We forget about the things that are actually happening and observing them, the little nuances that our children have or change or whatever it might be, the things that they pick up on, especially as teenagers, right? And young children too. Things are changing all the time. And so I found myself, here's a practical exercise. Like, I just find myself, just even if I have an hour and I'm not doing anything, I just watch my children. I'm just observing what they're doing, and I'm like, okay, they're kind of into that. What are they listening to? What kind of music do they like? And hopefully, you can find some mutual ground to talk about. And I'm finding this with my 10-year-old, is he's not quite at the teenager, but he's changed in terms of what he likes over even the last year. So I have to keep up with that. And if I can keep up with it, I can find some mutual ground. But it is a changing environment. I would say
Yeah,
it's not as easy as we think in terms of, hey, yeah, 6 months later, a lot can change for a child or for a teenager, and so we
100%.
we have to we have to keep up to date with that.
Yeah, as you're talking about this word observe in DBT therapy, in dialectical behavioral therapy. So when we talk about mindfulness, which is obviously a big part of a lot of things that we do, one of the models in mindfulness is what we call ODP: observe, describe, and participate. If you want to be mindful, if you want to be present with something, observe what it is that you're doing. Be involved in driving the car, in playing basketball, in tying your shoes. Observe what's happening. What does it feel like with the laces between your hands? And what does it feel like as your foot is getting into the shoe? And I think
Yes,
those things apply exactly over here as well. Like, what is it who is my teenager hanging out with? When they're smiling around those people, what's happening? Who are they with? What are the topics that they're talking about? And I think the number one thing, and this is as I'm writing down all my notes over here that I'm picking up from you, is something that I've learned from a mentor of mine, something we've talked about in this podcast numerous times. And I think it's pretty cool how we keep coming back to it. But Bessel van der Kolk talks about this a lot when it comes to trauma, when it comes to what's happening to the body, is to ABC the moment. Always be curious, ask questions, and making a U-turn and asking questions to yourself. So going inside and being able to say, okay, what's happening here? What's happening now? What's happening with me? And when we're able to do that, we'll know, do we have enough food inside of us? Do we need to have a little kick before we step into the house? How am I feeling right now? That meeting that just finished, it didn't go so well. Okay, what am I doing about it so that I can wear the proper Disney dad hat right now so that I can walk into the room and I could be that person here? Yeah, but I don't have the right energy for it. Okay, so what else can I do? How can I use the resources around that can allow this situation to be what it's supposed to be, which is the best for my child or children in this specific situation? At the same time, I think something I just want to touch a little bit more on with you, when I think the concept of making sure you put on your oxygen mask before you put on your child's oxygen mask applies over here as well. You talk about, food, talk about taking care of yourself. Can you give like one or two tips over here regarding how a parent can make sure, how a dad can make sure that they're taking care of themselves and they're putting themselves not in a selfish way, but in a way that they have the energy and the resources properly so that they can do things with their kids properly? What are some of the pointers or things that you would guide parents to or guide fathers to so that they can be better prepared by putting on their mask first so that they can help put on the mask of their child?
Yeah, and I think so. So just on that note, I think that's a very important question. Is so for any person, whether it's a man or a woman, prioritizing your own health is the most important thing. Prioritizing your effectiveness is the most important thing. So here's what I find: individuals that may not be putting themselves first will eventually have to come back and put themselves first. It catches up with individuals later on in their years, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally. It happens at some point. What is easier is you just don't get to that point. You don't get to that point because you're prioritizing yourself. So what you do and what I do, I can share an example, is I always prioritize myself first. I meditate and I have mindfulness practices. That's my number one priority throughout the day. First thing I do in the morning. Also, exercise is another one that is I'm going to say a non-negotiable. It's a must. And then also walks. Daily walks are very important because it enables you to step away, and it's just a great exercise. If you can do mindfulness walking, it's great as well. So those are just three simple things that I do to keep my health going. And it's not selfish to put yourself first. It's not selfish. You should not feel guilty. And that's one of the biggest challenges parents face, is feeling guilty for doing things for themselves. It's not. If you feed yourself, because here's what ends up happening. I find this with myself as well. When I am not dealing with my kids appropriately in a way, for example, if I raise my voice or yell or say something, like I'll say friggin', and my daughter hates that. She's like, that's a swear word. I'm like, okay, I won't say that, but it's come out. Um, it's because I'm not in the right state. It's because I haven't brought myself to the point where have to resolve whatever's inside of me. So I haven't put myself priority, because when I'm aligned with who I am, when I'm feeling good about myself, when I put myself in priority, I'm able to react. I'm able to engage differently with my children. So there is a direct correlation there. If I find myself getting cranky, it's not because necessarily my kids, it's because there's something inside of me that I haven't dealt with. I haven't put myself in priority. Maybe I've been at work too long or dealt with a difficult client or whatever it might be. Or sometimes even with my wife, we have a disagreement and then it'll come out on the kids. These are the kinds of things that we have to do to make sure that we are at that level to be a better parent. Ultimately, if we take better care of ourselves, we will be better parents.
Yeah, 100%. Could you just expand a little bit more on that non-negotiable and how a father or a mother can find those non-negotiables that really give them that energy throughout the day as they're wearing multiple hats?
Yeah, well, I'm a firm believer in this because the science shows, and we did a lot of research and we had the research behind this in terms of mindfulness and meditation practices. Those, for me, I would say everybody needs to do it. They've shown now 8 to 12 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, are very, very critical, and it actually changes. So it changes your brain, you can say structure, neuroplasticity. So that part, I would say, is important. So put that in some point in your day. So I always have this rule: what's a priority to me, I will do first thing in the morning. Like that's my number one rule. So if mindfulness is the most important thing, it doesn't have to be a laundry list. I'm saying, what is the most important thing for you? If it's exercise, it's exercise. If it's going for a walk, it's going for a walk. If it's mindfulness practice, whatever it is, make that the first thing that you do, because that forces you to do it, and you should have the time to do it, because if you get up a half an hour before your kids, now you have that opportunity to do it, right? So I have no excuses for that one thing that's most important to me. Hopefully that helps. But the other thing too is um, finding those activities outside, those hobbies, those things that we enjoy doing, because we lose that as we get older. We lose that curiosity because we're just, again, on autopilot, on achievement, performance, those other things that bring us energy. So an exercise, before even having the discipline, is knowing what brings you energy, knowing what makes you happy. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, I'm sure you've experienced this many times, is that most people have forgotten what makes them happy, or they have lost sight of it and what brings them enjoyment and energy. And that is something that I find is even a bigger challenge than scheduling the time and being disciplined, is they haven't had created a list of all of those things. Again, if you have only 3 things on your list, guess what? You're going to make every excuse, because it's not perfect timing to do any one of those 3 things. But if you have a list of 15 different things that bring you energy, that you enjoy, now you have a broader spectrum and you can squeeze those things in. And so that's what we need to do, more importantly than scheduling, is take that list and make it bigger and expand it.
Love it, love it. Okay, so just to recap, Eric, I know we're like running out of time. We talk about the harmony, having our non-negotiables, and making sure that we have our things that we're doing for us. You talk about meditation and finding that time for you, that exercise. And I think it's important to note, when it comes to meditation, not every piece of meditation is good for everyone. You have to find the one that works for you. You have to find the app, the YouTube video, the book, whatever it is that works for you. It's like a favorite food. But my favorite food is not going to be your favorite food, but it's still my favorite food, and it works for me. And I think meditation works the same exact way. So for everyone listening, finding that meditation, find the one that works for you. We're talking about the identity and discipline, and obviously being curious, and that ABC. And I think there are so many parts of this that, Purdeep, hopefully we have an opportunity one time to talk a little more in depth when it comes to parenting, and specifically from the dad's point of view, and things that he can do to better himself, which will make him a better father. Are there any specific points that we haven't talked about that we've left out from the conversation, that as we finish up over here, you want to just like throw in for a minute here?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially for men, to focus on emotions, because that's something that we discount. And we could do an entire episode, more than happy to do that. But emotions are very powerful, not only from obviously a being perspective, a human being, well-being, but they're very important from a performance, productivity, influence, you can say, in terms of how you influence your children, how you influence your family members, how you influence people at work. Very, very important. So those, I would say that's one thing. If you can start mastering your emotions, you become way more powerful as a father.
Amazing. Amazing. Usually I'll ask for like a book that you would recommend, other than your own, that that people can get more information here. But I want to make it even more specific when it comes to finding that happiness and finding that purpose in a certain way within self. Any book that you would recommend, or maybe a podcast or a YouTube video or something.
One of my favorite books is The Book of Joy. They have the Desmond Tutu, and then the Dalai Lama. It's kind of like an interview style book. I love that book personally myself. I always recommend that to individuals, because it's a story of joy. It's a story of challenge and how people have overcome it and still focus on joy and happiness.
Beautiful. I love it. And we'll try to post a link for that in the show notes over here. Last question for you. If you can think of any superpower, but a mundane superpower that would help out with your parenting, what would that be?
Learning. I think it's a superpower for any discipline, any area. If you can learn, you can be powerful in anything.
That's amazing. I love that. Purdeep, where can people find more of you and about you?
I would say just simply, you can take a look at my website, purdeepsangha.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. We will try to have everything in the show notes over here. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for today.
Oh, thank you for having me.